Hey guys, today I want to talk about a specific question that is on many people's minds, and that is, what is the meaning of life? Now, this is a cliche question almost at this point, but when people ask this question, usually it begins with at the stage of what is the meaning of human life in totality, and then, of course, what is the meaning of my individual human life? So I'll look to answer these questions in this video and show you why the first question, particularly this question of what is the meaning of human life, is kind of a meaningless question, and why it really doesn't matter which answer you put into this question. The real thing that's important is the practical applications and the practical answers to what is the meaning of life for you individually as a human being, how you should behave and exist in the world. So this first question of what is the meaning of life in humanity on a grander scale, traditional religion used to really ground human beings and put us within a confined framework of what our meaning and purpose was in respect to God, right? But as secularization, especially in the modern world, this kind of tradition of answering this question really fell off completely. So in the modern world, there's no longer this unifying ordering structure. The issue, though, is people do, and I think the reason this is due to ego. We as human beings, we want to say we belong in a special place, we belong in a special situation within the universe. There's something special about us, we're so impressive. And so we seek to answer this question on a grand scale and say, human beings, we really serve this purpose here, or we really serve this other purpose here. Now, the issue is, let's say we answer this in the affirmative. Let's say there was some grand scope. Maybe we somehow help some feature of the universe continue to exist, right? Or like, so let's say some speculative pseudoscience, like maybe our consciousness confirms the quantum, like it dissolves the wave function so that like things exist, right? Like this is just, I'm just giving an example here, but let's say some kind of mechanism like that where we serve a big purpose. Well, even if we answer this in the affirmative, which is usually what people try and do when they're trying to answer this question, the issue is that this doesn't really help you in your practical everyday life, right? So let's say the answer, let's say in this case it was affirmative, we help break down the wave function and everything else, and that's our mechanism for helping the universe exist. Well, that's great. But the immediate question for your everyday experience is, so what? Right? It doesn't really change anything about you or your particular situation in life or what you're doing. Or it's great if that was the case, or some other mechanism along those lines was interesting. That's fascinating. Great. That's like an interesting piece of trivia, right? It's an interesting thing, like a beautiful work of art or like a beautiful math theorem. But in reality, it doesn't. It's not really the question people are seeking answers to when they ask this question. So even if we answer in the affirmative, I'm trying to point out that it wouldn't satisfy us. Now, of course, it's very easy to answer it in the negative and say, because we're not really aware of such a structure or such a mechanism that gives humanity as a whole purpose, right? Like, what's the purpose of humanity? It's very easy in the modern world to answer this first stage in the negation and say, there really is nothing that gives humanity as a whole purpose. And so then we go into the second practical stage that I was trying to get into, where it's, okay, well, now let's explore what are the practical, like everyday implications for your specific meaning as a person existing in the world, right? Because we just saw in the first stage, in the broader scope of humanity, whether we answer that in the affirmative as a global meaning, like there is some mechanism or there is nothing, it doesn't really matter. But that's not really the question people are really asking and wanting the answers to when they ask this question of what is the meaning of life. They're really asking the question of, how should I engage and operate in the world as a specific individual? And I think in this second practical question, the best answer I've seen of this, it comes from Heidegger's ideas, and in particular Hubert Dreyfus, which is like a secondary interpretation of Heidegger's text. The work that I'm referring to in this question is Being in the World. It's towards the end, some of the ideas that come into concrete answer that help us in this process. But yeah, so now I really want to explore the practical implications of how you should live your life specifically, because as we just found out, that's really the question that we want to know the answer to. So the framework that we're going to begin to explore particular interests for human beings, for you specifically, is going to be, I'm going to refer to it as mode of being, right? So in a sense, what is your particular mode of being, and then I'm going to also refer to it as like a mini universe for you. But really what I'm talking about here is, in layman's terms, interests, right? So what are your interests? And if you take a specific example, let's say maybe you like video games, you like sports, you like art or fashion, any of these can be a mini universe, any of these can be a mini mode of being for you, right? So your interests. And what do I mean by this, and why is this so important? Because let's say you take maybe you're into video games or sports or whatever. Within each of these universes, there is a kind of refined structure. So if you let's say delve into one of these structures or modes of being, you immediately place yourself in relation to all of the other elements within that. So let's say you play a video game. Within that video game, there's ranks. So depending on your skill, you fall within some respective rank. Depending on your rank, there's a certain status associated with it. Within this game, there's like, let's say the top players, right? They're famous, they're well known, and there's like a whole culture around it. And there's like a whole universe, a whole mode of being structured around, let's say, the little confined rules of this particular mini universe game. So there's things you will like and dislike within this mini universe. You yourself will be situated within a relation within this mini universe. Same with sports, right? So let's say you like sports or something along those lines, or your specific skill, chess, shogi, whatever. Within those specific games or confined, like within that very world, you exist in a relation to each of these objects. And you have likes, dislikes, there's goals. There's some people who are better in the subject or worse, let's say, in the subject. And really what this does is to orient you and give you a framework of defining you in relation to it, and then allowing you kind of to progress and develop within this framework. So it's kind of I think a good way to think about it is probably, I don't know how many of you have watched Evangelion, but in the original like anime, towards the end, like later episodes like 24, 25, there's a really famous scene I like where Shinji is floating in the kind of like an empty space or like nothingness, and he can't define his identity or any of his ideas. And the reason is because he doesn't exist within relation to anything, just free floating into space. But if you put him in a structure like a social structure or a social game or a social mini universe, which each of these things I've just described are, immediately there's an orientation. There's an up and down, a left, a right, a good or bad. You have desires, distastes, everything kind of gets oriented and confined into each of these things. So that's what this really helps to serve. And this is done through interests, right? Because your interests can be a large variety of things from many different broad scopes, right? So you can like fishing, fashion, you can be into philosophy, math, like video games, like you could like going out to the club, like it could be anything, right? Any of these interests can serve as an orienting mode of being structure. So now we get to some key implications of what I just talked about. And I'm going to quote Hubert Dreyfus directly here. He says, "Authentic design, since it does not expect whatever project it is engaged in to give it an identity and a meaningful world, can follow a project tenaciously, yet let the project go without grief when the project becomes unrealistic, i.e., when it ceases to show up as being what needs to be done. Since the project never defines the self in its world, there will always be something else in the world which becomes most important as soon as any particular project ceases to fill that role." So in my opinion, I think this is extremely important and very like a additional structure of what I just talked about. Because what Hubert Dreyfus is in essence saying is that, let's say you pick any of these specific modes of being. Let's say you're really into fashion or video games or a board game, and for whatever reason this project, this mode of being that you decided to engage in, is not working out for whatever reason. Let's say you're an athlete and maybe you got injured unintentionally. Now you can no longer exist within this confined structure because you can no longer play the game that you want to play or that you like to play. So this is imposed on you because you don't have a choice or say in it. What Dreyfus is saying is that's fine. You shouldn't be sad and you shouldn't lament it and you shouldn't feel it as a total loss. Because first, this specific project or mode of being, so right, video games, fashion, sport, whatever, this was never a complete identity for you, right? This was only one of your identities, but it still helped us orient you and give you meaning in life. And now you've the mistake a lot of people do is, like, let's say they have to change this, they make each of these modes of being their sole purpose and identity. And because they do that, and whenever they feel lost, sometimes, a lot of times, like I said, unintentional, maybe due to injury or just, the tragedy of life, things happen and you can no longer pursue that specific interest that you're after. He's saying you shouldn't feel sad, because each new mode of being that you can engage in is so rich and so interesting, and again has that orienting structure that you don't really have to worry about when you enter into one of these new modes of being. So let's say maybe you're an athlete, you get injured, there's like top players, top schools, top coaches, whatever, or video games. Let's say you play video games, but for whatever reason you can't play video games anymore, something happens, etc., right? But now let's say you get into like math, right, or like art or some other subject, or let's say a board game like chess or shogi. Each of these is so deep and rich and serves as another new orienting structure that you can engage in, that the loss of the old one really doesn't matter, and you shouldn't lament it. So what ends up happening here is that there's so many different varieties of interests that you can have, and each one is infinitely rich. You can spend your whole life in any of these really and develop skills and continue to refine and redefine yourself within this orienting framework, that we shouldn't lament the loss of each of these particular ones. And let's say the examples I gave was, okay, you got injured or you couldn't do it. But let's say maybe you grow out of it. Maybe you no longer want to play that sport or that board game or whatever. You shouldn't necessarily feel this as like a loss, like like you're losing your whole world and your whole identity. That's not really the case. What's really going on is now you can move on to another new form. Let's say maybe you like to play video games or a sport, but now you can't do them for whatever reason. But now maybe you really get into fashion. So now you get into the fashion world and you start studying different like fashion designers, right? Yohji Yamamoto, Rei Kawakubo, or like the different, like Paris, like in France, or like the different fashion designers, and you just really get into that world, into that universe. Or math, right? Like math is infinitely rich. You can spend literally your whole life studying any new subject in there. So there's always a new mode of being that will orient you and give you purpose and meaning that you can move on to. And so what that means is that you really shouldn't lament the loss of any particular one. If it does happen, you can always just move on to a next stage, and you're going to be just as satisfied, just as content, and there's always going to be something new. So whether it's imposed on you or whether you grow out of any of these modes of being or these mini universes, it's not an issue. You can always find a new one. And so what happens is you can pick each new one or stick to one particular one for your whole life until you come to an end in your life. Maybe towards the end of your life, the new mode of being or mini universe that you want to engage in is, let's say, plants or pottery or whatever is your new thing, right? But you can do this all the way up until the end of your life, and you're going to live a very rich and fulfilled life by the traditional means of something that gave you meaning, because you engage in all of these activities that just filled your time, filled your interest, like basically just gave you something to do and gave you a position and a meaning within a structure. And like I said, this is the practical answer to this. The other first question that we asked of, okay, what's the meaning of humanity as a whole? This question really is meaningless and not the question that human beings are asking when they ask this question, because that question is not satisfactory, whichever answer you get. So now at this stage, you're thinking, okay, great, thank you for all this theory and stuff, but how does that have any implications to me? Like, what should I do? What should I do? Okay, well, even if you're the most nihilistic, apathetic individual and you really have like very few interests and you're doing nothing, I would say that even you have like some interests, right? Like every human being has some interest, however minute or however small, right? You have some interest, you have something that really keeps you interested or gets your attention. Well, I would say is like take, say, a couple of these, take one, and just start to immerse yourself and explore more in that specific interest. Spend more time trying to find out about that interest. And like I said, each of these modes of being is so immense, so large, and so huge that you can really spend your whole life in any of these, regardless which one you pick. So pick one of these threads, right? Pick one of these modes of being that you have an interest in, and really start to immerse yourself into that world. And the more you immerse yourself into that world, the more you'll find things that you like and dislike, and you start to position yourself within this like interest that you found. And that really will help kind of situate you, orient you, and give you meaning and purpose in life. And like I said, let's say you find out, okay, after a while, this is not for you. Well, then move on to another interest. Like I said, there's always another interest. And that's what Dreyfus was trying to say, that really there's always a new project to take on, a new project of meaning and purpose to go after. So go on to the next thing if this one doesn't work out after you give it some time and immerse yourself. And eventually you'll find yourself just in a new orienting structure, and you just do this until the end of your life. And I promise you that you'll feel fulfilled, you'll feel content, you'll feel interested, you'll find some direction and meaning. And that's really the answer to that question for that. And yeah, so honestly, that's the end of the video for today. I don't want to make this too long. I could spend a lot more time in detail for any of these cases, but I think for the practical applications of these ideas, this is good enough. So let me know in the comments below what you thought about these. Like, comment, subscribe. If you want me to further explore some of these ideas or talk about something a little bit more in the comment section, I'd be more than happy to. But yeah, I hope you liked this video. I got many more like these coming. I think some of the next ones I'm going to do are on Dostoevsky. But yeah, so stay tuned for those. Thank you for your time and have a great day.